This is House Planning Help episode 205. Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-build, because I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and try to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. Coming up in this session, my guest is Dan Higginbotham, Technical Director at Parsons Whittley. We're going to explore technical design and exactly how do they produce a tender package from what starts as just a load of concepts. There's a bit in the middle that we're going to explore in a few moments. Buckinghamshire Passive House has been our second in-depth video case study in the hub, and I've found it so interesting. Heading down to site every 7 days to 2 weeks. It's varied on and off as we've gone through it, but just watching this building rise from the ground, and then that exceptional air tightness result of 0.07 air changes per hour at 50 pascals. In fact, I'll link that into the show notes again if you missed that one. Just really, really good stuff to have been capturing it all. And because we've recorded so much video, there's a lot of it that just hasn't been seen, and we've got lots of ideas of maybe presentations we want to put together. Another thing that Jay was keen to do was create a training video. So halfway through construction, before it all got covered up, she went onto site and had a few things that she wanted to explain. It's mainly aimed at carpenters, or if you're going to be building using this system yourself, trying to explain all that detail. But I think that Jay is brilliant at communicating details, difficult concepts, and just making it accessible. So that's why I'm saying to you, this video, I think it'll just help you understand air tightness and some of the care that's needed on site. It's also got an interview that she does with Wayne, the lead carpenter. Wayne is just such a lovely guy, a real character. I know the clients, they didn't want him to leave at the end of it because in real time now, the building is pretty much there. I think they're landscaping maybe on the outside, and they've still got the old house that has to be demolished. That was part of the planning conditions. So houseplanninghelp.com/205, I will link you across to that video because it's well worth a watch. Let's move on to today's interview with Dan Higginbotham. It's another one on my own project. As I mentioned, I'm trying to take you behind the scenes to the bits that I feel people don't talk about or show you. So I'm trying to change that. And how exactly do you take concepts and then turn it into detail? Well, it's the stage of technical design, and in this case, it's the work of an architectural technician. So my first question to Dan is, what do they do?
They take the conceptual model generally, although I and a couple of the other technologists will do a lot of 3D modelling or conceptual modelling. Generally, that comes from our practice architects. One of those will pass us a scheme on a conceptual model, which is in the raw 3D format. Us as technologists or technicians have to make that into a construction drawing that someone will be able to build from. So it's actually physically making a pretty drawing, for want of a better word, into something that is realistic and can be built. So that's the essence, I suppose, of what we do. We actually get it built from a concept drawing, really.
Where do you start with that process?
Generally, the floor plan, I would say. So you take the 3D model, which is fairly basic, just some simple line drawings, and you would then develop that into actually how you're forming the constructions. So how you're building up the walls. Is it a solid wall? Is it a cavity wall? Has it got external insulation? Then that gives us then a scaled, accurate plan that we can then start producing sections, elevations, details from. So that's where I would generally start.
And is it a case that you're following a theme of what you've done before, or is every project different?
Yeah, you do follow a theme, I suppose. I would methodically go through the same process. Nowadays, there are very few designs that I would say are standard or go forwards, although you've got the history or the concepts in your head that you can take from. But generally everything we do nowadays seems to be very bespoke, very one-off. Although you can reuse ideas that you've done before, you generally have to sort of start the whole process again, depending on how people want to construct it. There's so many different methods of construction.
But you are familiar with lots of different types, or are there ones that you... this is, to me, your job is just so confusing, and I don't know how stuff doesn't get missed, because there's such a level of detail in this, and as you say, multiple different ways of doing it.
Yeah. I'll be honest, things do get missed sometimes, but you try not to. As I say, I try and sort of go through the same methodical process each time, and just try and make sure you pick up everything that you need to. But yeah, there are so many different technologies. I don't know them all personally, but that's the whole process of our industry, I suppose. Everything is progressing, everything is going forwards. You have to research and develop, or that's what we have to do. Continuing professional development, that's all about learning these new technologies, new products, new resources that we can utilise and either build better dwellings, better fabric in the dwellings, or just better overall dwellings, maybe faster construction methods, more sustainable way of constructing the building, the project, whatever it is. And as I say, it also depends on who your client is, I suppose. Housing associations will have certain levels of sustainability they need to achieve. Some of the housing associations we work with also have requirements for modern methods of construction, so they're forever pushing the envelope to find a better, more cost-effective way of achieving that sustainability standard. So you're forever learning new things, new technologies, new ways to construct things, and we just somehow have to try and keep up with that process and the industry, really.
On this particular project, then, if we use that as an example, we'll go and open up a few documents just to trigger some thoughts, really, for me. Does Chris give you some guidance? You've mentioned John, who is the architect on our project, doing the line drawings, but you need something. We haven't, as clients, given you that much to go on. So, yeah, that starting point of digging into what you need.
I think there's a bit of a whole team process, if you like. John will come up with the concepts, and then perhaps myself and Chris and John will all sit down and think, how are we going to construct this? I think it does help in a way when you've got the finishes of the building envelope already selected. So yours, for instance, was a render, but you had a brick plinth, things like that then you start thinking, well, this would be perhaps more cost effective and simpler to build as a cavity wall. Traditionally the whole industry is very typically used cavity wall constructions, although in your instance the cavity is much wider than perhaps you traditionally use. But I think that makes sense when you're doing a very traditional vernacular building like yours. There are other things you could use, timber frame, for instance, would stand up with render quite well. There's other things you have to consider, though. There's ventilation gaps and other things that perhaps in this instance we thought timber frame wasn't necessarily suited for. And then you've got speed and things. At the time, blocks were fairly easy to get hold of, so we thought that's a good idea to progress the traditional cavity side. But then just before we started, there was a shortage of blocks, but luckily your contractor has managed to get round that. But in hindsight, that shortage of materials could have an effect on how you actually design or build things. There's a huge shortage of PIR in the industry at the minute. Because of that, we're trying to find alternate materials to use or substitute the PIR for different materials. How
do you know what's available? Because you're not ordering it necessarily, are you? No. So again, is it just trying to keep on top of what's happening in the industry?
I think word of mouth, or we manage a lot of projects in the office, so you do get a handle on that from other contractors, other projects we've got on board, things that you hear in the industry, on the news, through various build indexes or other things like that, various forums that give you sort of up-to-date information about what the issues are in construction industry, current topics that they're discussing. So as I say, but the best thing I found is on the larger sites that we do, the big social housing sites, they're where you really find out sort of what's most cost-effective and what is very difficult to get hold of at the minute. So that really helps to balance up what you need to use and where.
For this project, it was a tender process, so perhaps it's worth just going to the end, and then maybe I'll fill in that difficult bit in the middle. What are you presenting the people who are entering into the tender with?
What we're trying to give them is a comprehensive package of information that they're able to sit down and accurately price, and hopefully incorporate all of the costs involved to build that project out. So we would typically have a full set of construction drawings. So we start with plans, elevations, you've got all your sections. We may do some more sections if there's particularly difficult junctions or details in the building, because it's passive house, surrounding the details of the window junctions, door junctions, floor junctions, both the ground and the intermediate floor, roof junctions, ceiling junctions, eaves and verge junctions. So you have to detail a lot, and in your instance, because it's passive house, we had to detail all the penetrations, both coming in and out of the building, to ensure they don't get missed or forgotten about, and ensure they get properly air sealed.
So if it wasn't a passive house, would some people just not worry so much about those?
I don't think you'd do quite so much detailing, particularly for a service coming in or out of the property. There's less risk if they didn't quite seal it to a great standard. It would probably still pass building regs.
Let's just open up a couple of these drawings here. This is pretty random at the moment. So I've opened up a joinery schedule. Do you have to leave this as a bit of a whole? Because that was something that we have selected. It's taken a very long time to actually narrow down what we want, and it's changed through the course. So are there some bits that have to stay a bit woolly?
Yeah, I think there are a few items. The windows, although in your project in particular, we had a chosen supplier, but through discussion, your wishes, etc., we've now reverted to an alternative supplier. That's just something I think that happens through.
But you needed something to get going,
yes,
didn't
exactly.
you? So
we need something to get a price on. So either you leave it as a very woolly PC or provisional sum for the joinery, which I never like. So we got an accurate price from a supplier, although it's now not the one we're using, but it gave us an accurate idea of the costs surrounding the external joinery in that instance.
So do you have to draw up all of the windows first of all? You know what the house looks like.
Yeah.
You draw them all up. Does this all in a computer package slide back into the house, or
Sort of. There are more sophisticated AutoCAD programs than perhaps what we use. We have got a package or suite of that, which is your BIM, your Building Intelligent Modelling. That would you draw the model up, and then basically that would then produce you a joinery schedule from that drawing. Unfortunately, because I'm not trained in that, and I generally haven't had the experience in that, this is based on just the standard AutoCAD, from which I then draw the elevations with the joinery in it, and then from that reuse those to create a joinery schedule. But no, everything you see on the paper we have to draw and or annotate accordingly.
Let's just open up a floor plan here. As you mentioned, this is a starting point because you can fill out the walls and things like that. What insulation did you choose and why?
On your project in particular, we used, as I say, traditional cavity wall. We've gone 150mm with the cavity because it is quite a large property, so that makes it slightly easier to get through the PHPP package. In this instance, we've gone with a fairly high-performing mineral wall. Let's say full fill at 150mm, and it's got a lambda value of 0.032, which is the highest of the minerals you can get. In this instance, I have specified canal earth wall, but there are a few others in the market, and no doubt your contractor may choose to change that should he be able to get it more readily available from somewhere else, or perhaps the costs fluctuate and he's able to get an alternative product at the same price, but that's yet to be discovered.
So we've looked at the floor plans, and the next step would be moving to a section. Mm-hmm. Take us through, we'll put this one into the show notes as well, how this differs and the sort of things that you're looking at. To me, I can see, say, for example, the different floors that you've got to think about what you're specifying there. We've got MVHR to consider. We've got, in this project, the awkward cat slide at the back.
All things we've got to consider. And even more onerously, because it's a passive house. You've got to consider all those junctions, all those details, but at the same time we're trying to manage a budget and I suppose your expectations of what you're going to get out at the end of the project. So with all those things together, we've selected, as I say, trying to keep fairly traditionally. I know you were keen to try and incorporate more ecological features than perhaps we've done, but I think the costs might have spiraled above the budget, although we are, where we are with the budget. But I think they could have gone a lot higher, depending on what you utilise, and it would have taken off. You had some height constraints, so as I said, the more ecological products you often find, the more of it you need to get the same performance values that we've got out of these products. So you might find the height of the building was getting too much and you were constrained at planning to keep the height to what it was specified on the planning drawings. So we really just went down trying to keep it as simple as possible, something that most builders would be familiar with or able to build with. So we basically start at the foundations. We've gone with a very typical strip foundation, then moving up into the cavity wall construction that we spoke about earlier. We've then gone with a fairly standard beam block floor nowadays, what you'd use on most new builds. We've got obviously slightly more insulation within that, and we've utilised.
Will that be PIR?
That will be PIR insulation in that instance, to give us as thinner construction as we could get, but the performance that we needed to get. So PIR is the most suited product.
And it's also got to be rigid, isn't it?
It has, yeah. It's got to be solid. It can't be squishy like the mineral wool. Then on top of that, we put a screed. Obviously, there's various membranes and air tightness products in between that. We've also, as I say, utilised, it's a bit unusual for a beam block floor, but we've gone with a very lightweight aircrete block to get, again, the best performance and to try and minimise the thermal bridging at the junction detailing of the wall to the floor. Then in the cavity walls, we've gone lightweight aircrete blockwork again to give the best performance values we can get. Then up to the second floor, again very typical for a new build construction, we've gone with a metal web or a posi joist, floor joist, which is a pre-manufactured joist. It gives you many options to route the surfaces without having to laboriously cut sort of holes through traditional solid joists, etc. And likewise, the alternative is I-beams or JJI joists, which you still need to cut holes within. I just find these are much simpler, and a lot of the tradesmen and subcontractors prefer it. And again, particularly as we're routing MVHR pipework, as you said before, through the floor, these give you the best scenario that you've got a structurally sound floor with a lot of space to run the MVHR and other services. And then going up, we go to a sort of, I'd say, a fairly standard traditional truss roof, but obviously, as you pointed out, there is, in your instance, the more complex cat slide to the rear of it. But through the assistance of one of our roofing truss suppliers that we use a lot, they were able to come up with a truss that could form the cat slide as well, rather than introducing complex steel work to support both roof structures. And also the steel work could become a thermal bridge and or a air tightness nightmare to try and seal. So, and then traditionally inside we've just gone with stud work walls and or block work where they're necessary for support. So.
How many of these sections do we have? Because you obviously have to do it at one part of the building. Yeah. So does it just depend on how different the building is?
Yeah, it depends on how different each part of the building is. Your building's fairly linear, so the sections in most of the instances will be the same. But in this scenario, we've got 4 sections, 1 of the garage and 3 of the house, because I wanted a typical section, if you like, 1 through the stairwell so we could see that arrangement, and then 1 through your full ground to first floor sort of French door and window and boarded panel arrangement, just again so that's not missed or misthought about how you actually construct that, both thermally to ensure there's no bridges and for air tightness to make sure nothing gets missed about the air tightness.
Does the thermal bridge stuff come quite naturally after a while?
After a while, I think it's harder to work on something like this, which has to be low or no thermal bridges, to then go back to standard practice or building rig stuff that allows for a certain number of bridges. I think that's the harder point on it, to go backwards.
A quick question on the electrical side of things. How does that work then in knowing where to start with putting lights? Again, it's iterative, isn't it? And plug sockets and things like that.
Yes. I suppose I would try and visualise myself in the space and how I would use that room, walk around that room, and hopefully with that in mind, I'd position sockets, light fittings, switches in the most appropriate locations. Obviously, two people could look at it and think of two different scenarios completely, and by no means we're no electrical designers, but we've done enough of these, we've built and developed enough housing to know, I think, what works well.
Because we tried to do that same exercise of walking through, and actually we found that 90% of stuff, I don't know, maybe people have quite an intuitive way, or you have an intuitive way of knowing where the different bits and pieces are.
Yeah. I think, that comes from experience and just doing this a lot, but each client will have their own input, particularly on light fittings and lighting locations, for instance. I think less people are worried about socket locations, but I think just what would work best, what would I position in this room, where are the wardrobes going, for instance, where would dressing tables or other things go, where would you like to use those services, and also nowadays, where does the TV go, where does the computer go?
Does it get tricky when, for example, we were thinking about our spare bedroom which doubles as my study, and how you then move between the two, because actually you might need the plug sockets in different places because you're trying to be clever and have a flexible space?
Yes, I think that does. You're trying to combine two functions within one room, and you've got to sort of facilitate or provide all the services for both those functions. So I think in this instance I've taken it more as a bedroom office, home office type of scenario, but I think that's something that, once we start looking at it closer, once we've actually physically got the space on site, yourself and Kay might then go, I want a few more sockets here, or I want this or that here. And I think, again, that's just how the whole process progresses, really, that you try and make the best educated guess of where you want these things on paper, and then we try and actually physically look at the positions of those on site once the rooms are built, and then you make your final mind up if they're right for you.
We've had Alan as a consultant on this project, so is that a section of this that he deals with, and does it look after itself, or do you have to get your head around it too?
Alan Clark deals with the mechanical side of things, so he's dealt with all of the MVHR design, all of the hot and cold water supply design, any of the routing, the boiler, how you're actually heating the property. He's now brought that up to a standard that we had to, get our heads around it. Again, discuss and agree whether, for instance, a gas boiler in your scenario was the best approach or the best system that we could provide you within your budget. Likewise, MVHR and where that was sited on this particular project has now been sited within the garage, just because storage within your property was at a premium. So I think we have to get our heads around it, and particularly we have to get our heads around how the ductwork work is distributed within the property. Again, what we try and do is utilise that intermediate floor space with those open webs and try and route most of the pipework through there, and then include some risers to get us ventilation at first floor level. But we used to have a further service void at first floor level to distribute ductwork around. What we found was that you were mainly building this service void to ensure all of your ceilings were level, but you'd only utilise, say, sort of 10% of it, and the rest would just be a very expensive void within the roof. So now we try and avoid doing that, and just try and consider quite early on where our ducts are routed so we can avoid putting that false ceiling in the majority of the property, although you have got quite a large section of service void at first floor level through your landing space, and then from there it's distributed to each room.
A lot of this conversation has been about the design details and trying to map out how you go from that position at the beginning with just line drawings to filling it all out with detail. But there's another document here which is quite big and provides the contractor with a lot of information. So what is the schedule of works and how do you bring all that together?
Once you've got your drawing package to a level that I think is there or thereabouts complete, I would then methodically go through the whole drawing package and try and itemise or describe every section of works, every construction, so whether it be foundations, walls, floor, roof, and put that into a document that the contractor can use to firstly price, then understand exactly how they're building the project, exactly what materials are going into it, because we don't always specify certain materials on the drawings, particularly blocks and perhaps insulation sometimes, because they often change. So we generally will specify an insulation but not actually the exact make or model of insulation. That can be left down to the specifications, so both documents need to be read hand in hand. And then ultimately, as I say, once you've produced every section you think is related to the project, that gives the contractor a clause to price from, and then this formed the priced specification which was used within your contract.
And that really is the next stage, is adding it all up for the tenders, which we'll come to another time. Dan, really enjoyed chatting to you today. Thank you very much for all your information.
Thank you very much. Nice to speak to you.
In addition to the interview, we provide show notes too online, and today you can find them at houseplanninghelp.com/205, where you can review the main information once again. We tend to summarise and also just give you some headlines if you just want to flick through it really quickly. We've included a handful of drawings too, not the whole drawings package, just to give you a flavour of some of those drawings, the detail that has gone into them as well. And if you've got a comment or you'd like to ask a question, scroll down to the bottom of the show notes. We'll also link you across to Parsons and Whitley. All of that in today's show notes, houseplanninghelp.com/205. And when Chris was down on site last time, it's great to hear that they have so many passive house projects going through their firm at the moment. And I think what he was saying was the greatest challenge is actually building up their own team, because not all architects can be based in London and they're based in Swaffham. So attracting that talent, if you're perhaps someone in the industry and you've got the skills, well, check out their website because they put all the job vacancies on there. And one of the advantages is you get to live somewhere beautiful as well. You don't have to be in London in the smoke. It doesn't cost a fortune. houseplanninghelp.com/205 will link you across to Parsons and Whitley. Let's finish up on a hub update. What's been going on? Well, we've just had Alan Budden from Eco Design Consultants on one of our progress calls. I can't remember whether I've told you about this, but one of the great things that he did was the 8-point guide to comfort and health, because we have this video feature that we can switch on. He can do a little presentation. I think we're going to do more of these because it works really well just as an icebreaker. 8 slides where he was just trying to get as much key design detail across that will help you to focus on comfort and health. So that's in the archive now. We've also archived the next episode of the Buckinghamshire Passive House story. This one is on penetrating the airtight layer, and also Jay and Wayne head up into the attic space because it's a warm roof and take a look at the MVHR system and how it's all going to work. It's an unboxing really. And of course, all the regular stuff you expect from the hub, the courses, trying to lay things out step by step, the members only forum. If you need more details, head to houseplanninghelp.com/join. Thank you for listening. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.